Back in the 70s and 80s, before the advent of VHS, chances are if you saw a classic movie, it was on the 430 movie. With their famous theme weeks, it was a chance to see movies you never saw and get reacquainted with some old classics. Now, on the 430 movie, we take over the vertical and the horizontal and put together our dream theme weeks that you could watch at home and relive the glory days of the 430 movie. Welcome to James Bond Week on the 430 movie. Steve Melching.
Hello there.
Steve is, of course, a writer for such shows as Transformers Prime, X-Men the Animated Series, Star Wars Rebels, and the upcoming Star Wars Resistance. Sitting next to him is returning panelist and still champion, Darren Doctorman, a conceptual artist on such movies as Chronicles of Riddick, recently finished Season 2 of Westworld, and was the visual effects supervisor on Star Trek The Motion Picture Director's Edition.
Yes, greetings.
And last but not...
Do we each have to do an impersonation of a different Bond for this?
I expect you to expect me to talk. And sitting next to me is Ashley Edward Miller, and he is a writer for film and television. His credits include X-Men First Class, Red Sonja, the upcoming Red Sonja. I have Batman 66 right here. He did not write Batman 66, but he did write Thor and worked on Black Sails in the upcoming Season 2 of Lore on Amazon. And, of course, I'm Mark A. Altman, a former writer-producer for such shows as Agent X, Castle, and The Librarians, and am author of the new book, So Say We All, An Oral History of Battlestar Galactica.
By the way, hi.
Hi, Ashley. Good to see
How are you, Mark?
Let the man speak.
And
Of course I am.
welcome to our Fantasy Theme Week, 430 movie, where we program all 5 days for you, so you don't have to.
Yes.
And today, we're telling...
This is a big one.
This is the big one,
The
007.
ones that started it all, Dr. No.
I mean, you know, you
Sean
joke.
Connery is James Bond 007.
But it is a little schizophrenic because, of course, no one associates James Bond with the 430 movie. Those of us who are old enough to remember associate James Bond with the ABC Sunday night movie,
Right.
where Ernie Anderson would say,
That's
yeah,
right.
the one that started it all.
Yeah.
Sean Connery is James Bond 007 in Dr. No. And, of course, you know, that was how many of us were really first introduced to James Bond.
That's correct.
Yes, that's true. And those of us geeks of a certain age were growing up before the advent of home video.
That was the only chance we got to see them.
So
because
unless
they-
you were seeing a current release
That's
James
correct.
Bond film, you had to watch it on the Sunday night movie.
Well, before we get to programming our 5 days of 007, I want to ask you, what was the first James Bond movie either you saw in a theater or saw, if you remember, on television? What was that seminal, that first movie that was sort of your first James Bond movie?
I feel like my first James Bond movie was The Spy Who Loved Me. Although there is an excellent chance it was actually Live and Let Die on the Sunday night movie on ABC.
Mm-hmm.
An angel keeps getting its wings.
Yeah.
No, I mean, but yeah, I think The Spy Who Loved Me was probably my first. So my first exposure to Bond was Roger Moore. I had no idea who this Scottish cat was for a while, and then I went, wait a minute. When I finally saw, Thunderball, when that came on, I was like, wait a minute, who's this guy? Where's Roger Moore?
Well, a favorite family story that I have is that on the night of July 1st, 1967, my mom and dad went to the movies to see the just-released You Only Live Twice.
Were you conceived in that theater?
No. But my mom's water broke right at the end credits. So, yeah, that was my first James Bond movie that I was at.
I can see the head, and the head wants to stay for the credits.
Right. But the first one I actually saw and remembered in a theater was Goldfinger. And I think I saw it at USC.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah.
wow.
Well, my first Bond movie was The Man with the Golden Gun. and it's amazing. I ever wanted to watch
Yeah.
another.
That's right.
But I have to say that was my gateway drug. I mean, yeah. Now it's probably one of my least favorite Bond movies, but at the time I was enraptured by this world of Bond, and of course, at that point, watched them religiously whenever they were on the ABC Sunday Night Movie. But I sometimes joke. I said my first Bond movie was North by Northwest, which in a way it was, because I saw that before Man with the Golden Gun. But I did then see Spy Who Loved Me in a theater in Valley Stream, Long Island, and then if there was any doubt that James Bond was my jam, that erased it, because Spy Who Loved Me is the apex, the zenith of Roger Moore's tenure with the franchise.
Absolutely.
So
the first one that I saw that I remember seeing in a movie theater was one that at the time I was embarrassed to say the title of out loud.
Octopussy.
Octopussy.
Octopussy. Say it 3 times.
Well, thank
8
goodness it
times.
wasn't called Octavagina.
I was well acquainted
now.
with Bond prior to that. I can't recall which was the first film I saw, but I had definitely been watching them on television, and I had read a bunch of the Ian Fleming novels, the couple years before Octopussy came out. So, but I remember I was super excited to see my first new James Bond movie in a movie theater, and it was Octopussy, which is actually one of my favorite Roger Moore Bond films.
Well, look, here's the thing. What are the criteria? Because when we program 5 days of 007, is it just the best Bond movies? Are we going to try and give each Bond a moment?
Bond his day.
Give each Bond his day?
I think we're.
Chronological?
I think that the problem is that we may have to pick one movie from each Bond if we're going to be fair. But I don't think we necessarily need to be fair.
I agree with that. Like, for me, I don't feel, and regardless of how you feel about Timothy Dalton, that Living Daylights or License to Kill makes the cut of 5 Bond movies. If you have to narrow 24 Bond movies, and if you include Casino Royale and Never Say Never Again, it's 26. Why should we arbitrarily say, well, we have to include Living Daylights or License to Kill?
The only reason you do that, I think, and by the way, I agree with you, but I think the only reason why you would do that is so that if somebody watched The Living Daylights, they realized, wow, you know what? Dalton was actually a really great Bond.
I agree.
And could have done some really great Bond films.
Right.
But sadly, then he did License to Kill.
Well, let's give Dalton his due, at least in conversation, if we don't program his films, because I'm a big fan of The Living Daylights.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's terrific, and I don't know if it does make the cut of the 5 best Bond films of all of them, but I really love it.
Well, we haven't established this is necessarily the best.
Yeah, exactly.
And
love
we
the
haven't
most.
established that this is, look, I mean, I could easily throw Moonraker in, except that it's disqualified because we included it in the Shadow of Star Wars a few
Also,
weeks
you'd
ago.
be beaten to death.
And that too. And I wouldn't make the case that it should be included among whatever criteria we use, 5 Bond movies, whether we're considering it the best or the most enjoyable or the most whatever. And then, like I said, there's still Casino Royale 67. There is still Never Say Never Again. You could argue that the Ipcris File belongs in a Bond week, Harry Palmer.
Except it doesn't have James Bond. Other than that,
Make that case. There, Operation Kid Brother, which is Neil Connery.
Oh, my God.
So there
Agent Cody Banks.
Agent Cody Banks, which you
He
you-
said,
you
shameless
wrote.
plug, residuals. Thanks, kids.
So there are,
Clouseau.
this is a much bigger conversation.
much bigger.
But I think maybe the way to do it is just to do what we normally do, which is give everyone a chance to speak for a different day, and then we can just argue whether or not we feel that's an appropriate suggestion. So, Darren, I think you haven't gone first yet.
Thank
so
you.
let's give Darren the first pick, first draw.
I am going to vote for my favorite James Bond film, which is From Russia with Love.
Great choice.
Excellent
Because
choice.
I think not only is it my favorite Sean Connery film, but also in my mind, because I've read all of the Fleming novels, I think it's the most connected to the Fleming novels of all of them, except for
He doesn't die at the end.
except for the part that he doesn't die at the end, right? Which he does in the book. For those who haven't read the book, it's so pure in its intent that this is spy games. This is it's country against country.
Toe to toe against the Ruskies.
Exactly, and it's so much. Well, I mean, they toned down the Russian sort of intrigue in it that is totally in the book, but they toned it down with making it Spectre. They made it Spectre.
Well, they were so smart because they didn't want these to become Cold War and
Exactly.
date the movies.
Exactly.
And then, of course, Kevin McClory had this great idea for Spectre.
Right.
But that's a whole other story.
But I think that the tone of it, the portrayal of Bond is completely within the realm of the books, and he's still dashing and adventurous, and we get to see all these amazing locations, Santa Sofia in Turkey, and in Venice, and all this wonderful locales. And it, to me, is the purest of the Bond films, because it doesn't get into all the sort of science fiction-y kind of, big, giant villain kind of thing.
It's so funny. I completely agree with you. I mean, I think it's probably my favorite Bond movie as well. It's certainly one of them. But what a testament to that is the fact that they still use that scene in the stateroom between Tatiana Romanova and Bond to test Bonds, because over the years when Sean threatened to leave, or Roger, they would do these tests, these screen tests with actors, and it was always the scene from Russia with Love. That is sort of the template, the benchmark of Bond. And so over the years, you see like James Brolin and Michael Billington and all these people that were up for the role, doing that scene. Pierce did it, I believe. So it's very interesting, and it's just such a terrific movie. I love Daniela Bianchi as Tatiana Romanova. Rosa Klebb is just La Lenya is amazing. As one of the great hench people in the Bond films. Of course, it also to me is one of my favorite. That and Thunderball depictions of Blofeld. I always thought he was better when he was mysterious, petting the cat behind the windows with just that dark, ominous voice of Anthony Dawson. And it's just, there's so much to love about From Russia with Love, and and it's short. It's not a long film. Right. It does so many things. And Robert Shaw is just
Shaw is perfect.
And tying together the whole room. Let this one bake your noodle just a little
bit.
So, Robert Shaw was one of the inspirations for the character of Sebastian Shaw, who was the leader of the Hellfire Club that figured prominently in the 2011 superhero opus X-Men
Not to be
First
confused
Class.
with the actor who portrayed Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi.
Right.
Take this
which was
mask
not Hayden
off.
Christensen.
Let
That's
me
right.
look
Now,
at you with my own eyes.
Here's where it gets better. In 1975, Robert Shaw fights Jaws. 2 years later, Roger Moore's James Bond in The Spy Who Loved Me fights Jaws.
You're blowing my mind here.
It's a conspiracy, man. It's all connected,
Time
baby.
is a flat circle.
You know what we got to do? We got to do War Week on the 4:30 movie. We can do like Apocalypse Now and Platoon and From Here to Eternity, and never mind. I'm getting off topic.
There you go. Sorry.
So anyway, Monday, From Russia with Love.
Yes. And it's a great film. And I love the tone of it. To me, that movie encapsulates everything that I love about a James Bond film.
So we all agreed From Russia with Love kicks us off, starts us off?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. No
No dissenting votes.
No dissenting votes. Steve Melching, Tuesday.
Oh boy, there are just so many of these Bond films that I love, and 2 or 3 of them are also from the Sean Connery years. So I'm loath to go to the Connery well again so soon. So perhaps I will skip ahead to George Lazenby's sole outing as James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which I think is one of the best overall Bond films. It has a wonderful emotional story for Bond where he, falls in love. He's, goes on this mission high in the Alps to uncover this plot by Blofeld. He's in league with crime lord, the father,
Gabrielle
of the,
Frazzetti.
the father of the woman he's fallen in love
It's
with.
just amazing.
And it has a terrific score. It doesn't have a traditional theme song like so many of the great Bond films have iconic theme songs, like For Marshall with Love or Goldfinger, or
Spy
You
Who
Only
But
Live
that John
Twice.
Barry main title, which is an instrumental, is freaking
It's
amazing.
a great title sequence. I love the score, that theme music, and the cinematography and location work is wonderful.
Michael Reed's cinematography is gorgeous.
And the stunt work with the stunt driving and the stuff with the skiing is terrific. I just think it's hard to beat. Overall, I think it's a terrific Bond entry, and one that's maybe not as well known. Kind of falls through the cracks often, since Lazenby only did one film as Bond.
And P.S. that ending.
Yes.
It's so shocking. It is so sad, and awesome, and well done. And it both comes out of nowhere, but it's also perfectly expected, and in the best way.
What do they say? The best writing is it's inevitable but surprising.
Exactly. Just terrific.
That's I think a really fine choice. Technically, if this was a real show, we'd have a problem because it's 2.5-hour movie. It would not fit in our time slot. But of course, this is our fantasy league that you can watch at home. So the hell with that. It's Tuesday, and I will say that it's interesting because I'm not sure how many people aware of this. When ABC first bought the rights to the Bond movies, it was problematic what they were going to do with this. One, because of the length, and two, because it was the least popular Bond movie at the time before the sort of critical revisionism kicked in. So they recut the movie so it didn't start slow, and it starts where they're already at Piz Gloria, and they brought in an actor to do a voiceover, and it's told it's like the opposite of Blade Runner with Harrison Ford. So instead of Harrison Ford narration being taken out, ABC created this Frankenstein cut with this James Bond narration that wasn't Lazenby narrating the movie and recutting it non-linearly. And in order to try and create some excitement to keep people watching it and to break it into two parts. And sadly, that's never been put on home video.
Wow, that's really interesting. I did not know
I think you can find snippets on YouTube. It's either been recreated or it's a fascinating. I mean, it's awful, but it's fascinating.
Well, one sort of drawback with this film, one thing that it always kind of bothered me, but Mark and I had an opportunity to see this film on the big screen recently, and it really stood out watching it on a big screen, is the terrible dubbing that they did of Lazenby when he's undercover
as George Baker from the College of Arms.
And it's so I mean, it was always weird watching it on on TV, but seeing it projected on a 60-foot screen, it was so obvious that it was not Lazenby speaking.
And the voice seems to be coming from his kilt.
Yeah.
Which is odd.
And a different movie.
Yeah.
An interesting movie.
It's I mean, obviously, the reason for doing that clearly was they knew that George was not, a brilliant actor, and they figured, okay, here we got us 20 minutes of the movie where we can have a real actor do his lines, but it's problematic. It's definitely problematic. But I think a fantastic choice, because part of the idea of the 430 movie is to introduce fans to movies they may not be as familiar with. And this is a movie that absolutely should be discovered by people who are maybe, start watching them with the Daniel Craig. Because the Daniel Craig movies own a lot to it. Our Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah. Daniel Craig is that era really harkened back to more personal stories for James Bond rather than, and more sort of continuity with James Bond rather than each movie having a new Bond girl, and it's sort of an emotional reset for Bond every time.
Yeah, that's a great choice. For Wednesday, I'm going to go with. I think we had a Sean, we've had a George. I think that Roger, having done the most amount of movies, should be represented. Representation matters.
I don't know if any of his films would be among the best, but he's certainly one of the most.
Hold on
iconic
a second.
ones.
I disagree.
All right. Okay.
I put into contention for Wednesday, which I do think is among the best. Spy Love Me. Spy Love Me is Roger's. He admits it's his best movie. A lot of people, a lot of critical revisionism said, For Your Eyes Only, took James Bond back to Earth. It harkens back to From Russia with Love and the classic Bond movies. It's not. It's not that. It's adequate at best. Spy Love Me has everything you want from a Bond movie and more. It's Bond and beyond. And you got to remember, they were at the time, Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun were released a year apart. This was back when they were still doing Bond movies that one a year. Because if you look at Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger, those were done there was one a year. Then it started becoming 2 years, 3 years. Now it's like 16 years between Bond movies. But so after Golden Gun and Saltzman sold his shares to UA, the grosses were down. It was a terrible movie. They were like, what are we gonna do? And basically, Cubby, rather than retrenching and going the way of the Planet of the Apes movies, where you end up with Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which looks like it costs 6 cents by the time you get to the end of the series. They lavish all this money on it. It's huge in scope. It has great gadgets like the submarine car. It has the most memorable opening teaser of any of the Bond movies with the ski scene and the parachute jump.
That is still one of the best done.
Yeah, for sure.
It has a mediocre score from Marvin Hamlish, sadly, is one of the few irredeemable. And it has one of the great Bond girls of all time. Barbara Bach is a major, Agent XXX, Major Amasova. So and then of course, Jaws, whether you love him or hate him, he's sort of a classic, iconic Bond henchman. So I feel like Wednesday, it's the middle of the week, cleanse the palate. It's Spy Love Me is the perfect movie, and you got
to get you over Hump Day.
Get you over Hump Day. You're swallowing submarines. You got Shane Rimmer in there as a sub-captain.
That submarine pen set, by the way, is phenomenal. That is a really beautiful set.
Well, it's Ken Adam. Yeah, I mean, it's Ken Adam at his best.
It's terrific.
I mean, when you look at from Dr. No to Goldfinger, to Dr. Strangelove to Barry Lyndon to Spy Love Me. I mean, Ken Adam is. I mean, the guy was a genius.
Well, I would fight you about For Your Eyes Only, because if I were to nominate a more film, that's probably the one that I would put in, I would program on a day. But I love The Spy Who Loved Me. It was the very first Bond film that I saw in the theater, one of the very first films that I saw in the theater. That was the movie that made me equate Roger Moore with James Bond, and then later in life wonder who the hell Sean Connery was. I think.
How dare you?
I know. My opinion has evolved in time, but
like Vecher.
Right, exactly. And I want to connect with the creator. No, I think there is so much about that movie that is just awesome, and it's kind of a perfectly structured, perfectly paced action movie. Roger Moore is on point. He never at any point, I feel, mugs at the camera. It's like he's still kind of in that place where he is being witty and not just trying to get a laugh in a meta sense. Mm-hmm. And it created a pattern. It created a kind of a format for his films, in the same way that Thunderball created a format that, of course, then that sort of became its own thing. But no, I love The Spy Who Loved Me. I can't think of any reason at all why it shouldn't be, especially Wednesday. It's sort of like the linchpin, of Bond. It kind of connects so many different things about the various Bond eras.
Yeah, I mean, I've come to praise Bond, not to bury him, so I don't want to attack For Your Eyes Only. But I mean, I feel like if you really, people always say, "Oh, that's the one where he gets serious." But if you look at it, it has that awful thing at the end with Margaret Thatcher,
right,
and the stuff with the parrot, and there's a lot of goofiness in For Your Eyes Only,
right?
Including, as we mentioned before, "I'll buy you a delicatessen, Mr. Bond." So I think this whole idea,
a disco Bond,
and the Bill Conti score, which is an abomination. So I feel like a lot of people say, "Oh, it gets back to basics," and it does to a certain extent. The scene climbing the mountain is great, and Topol is terrific.
That is so good too. That is a great.
And Roger Moore is really great. I think the argument for Your Eyes Only is that it is a side of Roger Moore's James Bond that is not normally seen.
Except we've seen that side with Sean Connery and Daniel Craig, who all do that Bond better.
Right, that's very
so.
true.
Like, let's see the
Nobody
Roger
does it
Moore
better
doing what
except
Roger
those
Moore
guys.
does well, which is The Spy Who Loved Me. Thursday. It's your
Thursday.
day. It's all about you,
Well,
my friend.
it's funny because I was sitting here thinking I was gonna say let's program Thursday with For Your Eyes Only, but I'm gonna back off from that. I am tempted to say The Living Daylights just to restart
You know
that
what?
fight.
I might be with you on that.
I would be with
Okay,
you.
so
Oh,
here's
my
what I'm gonna
God.
say.
You're killing me, guys.
I have a strong impulse that I would program Daniel Craig's Casino Royale
Yes.
for Thursday because I think it is hands down the best Bond film ever made. Period. It is certainly the most complete film, the most tonally complete, and again, like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, it has an awesome ending that you don't see coming that is also perfect and sad and it messes with your head. And Daniel Craig is just, I mean, he owns it. That opening sequence where he is chasing the parkour guy, and it's a perfect example of action as character because the parkour guy, he's jumping on stuff and he's going back and forth and he's running and he's on
You're
this guy.
making a great case for
Thank
why it should
you.
be Casino Royale.
And Daniel Craig is busting through walls. He's like shooting shit. He's like dropping. It's just pure brute force, and it just tells you
Blunt
everything you
instrument.
need to know. And I love that movie. Up one side, down the other. Great main title. However, I'm going to say The Living Daylights, and the reason why is because
Bait and switch.
yes,
Yeah.
because bait and switch.
Well,
I
again, it's
think
another
it's-
film that people haven't seen as much as
That's
these
right,
other ones.
and it's something that I
There's a
think if
reason
you're,
for that.
I think that if you love James Bond, right? If you've been introduced to the sort of the James Bond world through Daniel Craig, and you sort of vaguely sort of aware that Pierce Brosnan did a lot of movies that were okay.
Not
one
a
of them.
lot.
Well, okay, so GoldenEye was good,
GoldenEye is good.
and then the other movies happened. Okay. I think that Dalton is worth your valuable time to watch.
Absolutely.
He is terrific in The Living Daylights. The only reason why I think the Living Daylights doesn't quite stack up as sort of like the big Bond action film is that in the third act it gets
The
small.
Taliban is our friends.
Oh,
Well, there
I mean,
was
if we
a
wanted to
time
do
when-
that
yeah,
that
you know.
analysis of all the Bond films, it would get kind of fascinating with like the Cold War politics and all that. It's to me that stuff is irrelevant. The stuff that's most relevant is him, and the fact that I mean, again, I'm coming to this from a guy who thought that the James Bond universe began with The Spy Who Loved Me, and when I saw Timothy Dalton point a gun.
Did you know his parents were killed in a climbing accident? Does that change anything?
Not
You
a
found
thing.
out that his parents died.
It changed not a thing. But when he points a gun at you, when he points a gun, I believe it. I mean, there were just moments that just felt like this completely different character who somehow embodied everything that Roger Moore sort of failed to embody, and it was just I find him eminently watchable.
Well, he was like a man, you know.
Yeah.
He was a tough guy. That opening sequence, parachuting into Gibraltar, the infiltration sequence that
a
turned
good
into
teaser.
this whole. It was terrific with Schmersh coming
Spirit Spionum.
Right.
Spirit
That's the
Spionum,
spies.
yeah. That stuff
Yeah.
is terrific, and the Bond girl,
Miriam Diabo.
Miriam
Miriam Diabo is terrific.
There's that. I think it's it's Living Daylights where there is the fight in inside. I think it's like the MI6 headquarters, and it's no, it's not the headquarters, but there's like this MI6 agent in the kitchen. Is it that or Octopus?
Oh yeah, in
Yeah.
the safe house.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just
It's great.
and it's a great fight. And the thing that was great about it was telling us,
Bond isn't in it.
there are Bond isn't in it, but that's what's great about it because it's telling us that Bond isn't the only competent
Right.
agent.
That this is a
Yeah.
real world.
Exactly. It tells us it really sets the stakes and the challenge, I think, in a really interesting way.
See, here's what I think. Look, I don't dismiss Living Daylights because I don't think it's without merit. I do think it has merit. But I also feel like this is a game of chess, not poker, Mr. Spock. And if you were going to program Living Daylights on Thursday, that would mean inevitably that Casino Royale is Friday. I think we all agree that Casino Royale should be amongst these films. That means you're not doing any Pierce. You're leaving out
True.
Goldeneye. So for me, I think you're better off going from Spy Who Loved Me to GoldenEye and then to Casino Royale. Or you do Casino Royale on Thursday, and then you do the 1967 Casino Royale on Friday.
No.
No.
No. I think what happens on Friday is that the announcer comes on and says, "Oh my God, next week is Bond Week 2." Because
Is that what the announcer says?
yes, and he says it exactly like
It
that.
is next week.
Oh
is
my
also
God,
Bond Week.
we made a mistake.
Oh my God,
we licensed 8 episodes.
we have so many
The 4:30 movie will return in James
Yeah.
Bond
At
Week
6:30.
2.
because I really think that 5 is not enough.
The world is not enough.
You know what we
let's-
should do?
This is a special double
This is-
episode.
I was just going to say, okay, I will say instead of a second week, this is what we should do. We make it 007,
Okay.
and we Saturday and Sunday we program.
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I can go
it's
along
now,
with that.
007, 7 for 7, 7 for
Okay,
007.
there you go.
There we go.
And so we will expand from 5 to 7 movies rather than 2 weeks.
Because then we can absolutely have Living Daylights in there.
Because then we will do
Which
the
it
$1
should
million
be.
movie on Saturday, and we will
Right.
do the ABC Sunday night
That's
movie.
right.
The Love Boat and Fantasy Island will not be seen tonight,
right.
so we can bring you a very special presentation.
Well, let me just one other thing about the Living Daylights. It has one of the other all-time great Bond stunts in it when they're fighting on the cargo net, hanging
Yep.
out of the back of that Russian
Yes.
transport plane. That's a real. That's no CGI. Those are real stuntmen hanging out of the back of a freaking airplane. It's tremendous.
I agree. I look, I find the movie more schizophrenic than you guys do because at the time they were writing it, they didn't know. They originally wrote it for Roger. Then Roger was definitely not coming back. Then they were writing for Pierce, and then the Pierce thing went to hell in a handbasket over Remington Steele, and then literally Timothy Dalton finished Brenda Starr, and 2 days later was on set for Living Daylights.
Well,
So
this is good though. I mean, if we're transitioning into GoldenEye from here, I think that it was a good thing because I don't think Pierce is ready to play Bond in 1987.
he's
He was
too
too young.
Yeah.
He's too young.
He needed those extra few years to be seasoned. You need more seasoning.
I mean, I think there's a lot of goofy stuff, but then you also have great scenes like where he decides not to kill John Rhys Davies, you know, and because he feels like something is wrong. Like I actually think the story for Living Daylights is a great Bond story. I think the execution is somewhat
Well, the villain's a little
lacking.
goofy. What's his name?
Well, Jerome Crabbe,
yeah.
who's so great in those Paul Verhoeven movies like The Fourth Man,
Yeah.
who's not as great in this movie because he's a little over the top. And then you don't have a great villain. Joe Don Baker
Yeah.
is not great as Whitaker. So, like, to me, there are a lot of failings. But if we're doing 7 movies, I can get on the Living Daylights train for Thursday
to Georgia.
to Georgia, the midnight train to Georgia.
Good.
Because
Good.
Georgia's on my mind.
So
Because we all
Thursday
love Timothy Dalton.
Nah.
is the Living
Is the
Daylights.
Living
You know,
Daylights.
I don't because look, you know when he lost me, and a lot of people I think is when he jumped after that great teaser in Gibraltar, and he lands on the boat,
Gibraltar?
and he Gibraltar, and he I'm from Brooklyn, and he lands on the boat, and the beautiful woman says, "Who are you?" And he goes, "Bond, James Bond," and I know that he wanted to be the more intense, more real. He wanted to distinguish himself from Roger Moore. He didn't want to be the pretty boy, and he wanted to be true to the books and gritty. But that is such an iconic line, you can't throw it away. And I think that forever sort of put this imprintor on him that he was sort of humorless and dour, and that he was just this really which is Daniel Craig sort of synthesizes the best of Dalton and a little bit of Moore and a lot of Sean Connery, which makes him such a great Bond. Whereas Dalton had a lot of great qualities, but it just didn't quite come through. And but that said, I do agree. Let's go with Living Daylights for
just
Thursday.
as a personal anecdote, I think Dalton is the one James Bond that Darren and I actually saw out in the wild. We were at
the wild.
Sher-
On safari.
the Sherman Oaks ArcLight one Sunday afternoon to
Yeah.
see a movie.
And there he was.
There he was in the lobby of the ArcLight Theater by himself.
Looking
My
like,
wife would have divorced
looking
me
like
and
a
run to him.
homeless guy.
He's wearing like
maybe not
shorts
then.
and sandals and
Yeah.
by himself, looking kind of disheveled, and
Oh my
like
God.
that guy looks familiar.
MI6
Wait
would
a
be so
minute,
That's
disappointed.
Timothy Dalton.
He's in disguise, man.
You know what's funny? It's like he's so great in The Rocketeer, and he has so much charm, this Errol Flynn-like charm. And if he only brought some of that to Bond, he could have been a great Bond. I think he's a good Bond. I don't dislike him. Like I don't dislike any of them. But I feel like he was just missing a little of the charisma
Maybe if he
that
got
the
a
other
couple more
guys had.
films, that would
Maybe
have come out more.
Because you should look at Goldfinger, you look at Spy Love Me. These were high points for these actors, and
he didn't get enough time.
But
to
don't
grow
forget,
into the role.
Spy Who Loved Me wasn't the first or even the second Roger Moore.
Well, that's
Bond.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It takes the
Yeah.
third. The usually it's the third. Craig came out of the gate with his best one first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
you
Pierce
know,
too. I think
and
Pierce,
Pierce
but they
too.
had the best
But,
scripts,
you know,
best directors.
If you look
Yeah.
at Connery and Moore, even though I agree that Fear Eyes Only from Russia with Love is Connery's best, most people would say it was Goldfinger where he
Well,
really
sure, because that's
Well,
the popular.
popular
Goldfinger was the one that really cemented
Solidified
what
him.
became the
Yeah.
Bond formula.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
could definitely argue at that point, had Dalton gotten to do that third movie, that might have been the film. And they were moving in that direction because if you read any of the treatments and stuff that was being developed for Bond, the Bond 20, I think it was a little lighter and it was a little more in the vein of classic Bond as opposed they're getting away from the faux grittiness of like License to Kill.
Why did Dalton not return for a third film? Was it
Well,
a
I mean,
contractual
without
thing?
turning this into the history of James Bond episode,
Yeah.
what basically happened was you had this litigation going on when Giancarlo Peretti took over MGM, and to finance his acquisition of the troubled studio, he was basically going to sell off the library at cut rates, the Bond TV rights, and and the Broccolis, basically would be getting a lot less money than they should have been, what the Bond library was worth. So he had to sue United Artists MGM, and it tied up the Bond movies in litigation for a bunch of years. And when this was going on, time went on, and then it finally was resolved when John Kelly came and stuff. And when they were ramping up to do Bond again, there was a lot of feeling that Bond was over after License to Kill, that this was, passé. I mean, what was working was Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, and was Bond
License
even
to Kill was 89.
relevant?
Yeah,
Yeah. And what happened was basically UA told the Broccolis, yeah, we'll make another Bond movie, but not with Timothy Dalton. So they concocted this whole thing where Dalton said that he was stepping down and wasn't going to do it anymore, that he had a good run. But the real story is that United Artists basically put the kibosh on Dalton and wanted to recast, and they wanted Pierce.
Well, a lot of things changed. I mean, and maybe that's the segue to those years. But, the Living Daylights, License to Kill, the Dalton films were really the last films that were done in what I consider to be the system, the James Bond system.
Right.
It wasn't sort of the same group of directors and like the same like group of writers who kind of came up with the stories and kind of cranked them out. And sometimes they were great, and sometimes they were whatever. But there was always sort of a workman-like quality to them, with a very few exceptions. And I think when GoldenEye happened, they didn't just recast Bond. They kind of
They
recast the
entire
whole crew,
franchise.
yeah.
Because Maybaum was gone, John
Right.
Glenn was gone,
Yep.
almost all the and unfortunately Cubby Broccoli was very ill, and so that was the last movie that he was physically involved with, and barely that because he even with License to Kill, he had a tough time spending time in Mexico. So, but by the time you get to GoldenEye, it really is Barbara and Michael's franchise completely. Although Cubby was still alive and was involved in some of the early decisions.
Right.
But it was definitely the next generation, much as classic Star Trek evolved the next gen. This was sort of the next gen of Bond. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I'm not. It's basically, the next generation. And what they did would set the tone for what would be the next 25 years of Bond movies.
Which brings us to Friday.
Right,
Friday.
which brings us to Friday, because we just said Living Daylights for Thursday. So Friday, I think it has to be Goldeneye.
I think it
Yeah.
absolutely has to be GoldenEye.
And it's a worthy choice. It's a terrific entry, I think, in the Bond. It starred Pierce Brosnan, of course, as someone that I think a lot of fans wanted to see him in that role, saw him in that role for years. And he was finally getting, he famously was not able to take the role in 1987 due to his contractual obligations to Remington Steele. He's finally able to come on in 94 for GoldenEye.
Sean Bean.
Sean
Was
Bean.
terrific.
As another 00 agent.
Right.
Again, it's the idea of expanding our notion of what
the
MI6
Bond universe.
is in the Bond universe.
And there were some
the
great
the Bond cinematic universe.
there were some great set pieces directed by Martin Campbell, who later gave us Casino Royale.
A very underrated director, by the way.
Yeah, and by the way,
Campbell.
lovely human being. And you know, that movie, I think here's what surprised me. I expected Pierce Brosnan to kind of go back to what Roger Moore had been doing. I think a lot of people expected that, and he brought a gravity to it that impressed me. And I think, you know, if anything made the movies that followed, which weren't that great, work, it was his presence. It was his gravity. I don't think that he is the actor that, you know, Timothy Dalton is, or certainly that a Daniel Craig is. I don't think that anybody would ever confuse him with Sean Connery or Roger Moore. But he did a great job in the role, and he made it relevant again. And that story again tried to get, you know, into that inner life of Bond. And kind of break down what does it mean to be Bond, but in a retrospective way, which is really fascinating if you compare it to Casino Royale, which was about what does it mean to be Bond, but in a way that was looking forward about becoming Bond. So they're kind of fascinating bookends, and Martin Campbell is responsible for both of them and relaunching the franchise twice.
Yeah.
Right.
Only real ding is the score.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and I would argue, to me, GoldenEye is a very good movie. It's not a great movie. I think Martin Campbell did a yeoman's job. I think it's a great reinvention after License to Kill, which is just an awful movie.
But it's a great video game.
It is.
I really like Pierce in the role. I think throughout his tenure, he was underserved by his scripts. But yeah, I mean, one of the biggest problems with GoldenEye, sadly, is that awful score
Eric Serra.
by Eric Serra, and that really undercuts it at every turn, and really, you know, it shows you the power of a score to help or hurt a movie, and in this case, it just cripples that movie.
Unless you're a fan of mufflers being hit in an alley.
I mean,
Well,
you
this
know,
is what happens when you
I thought after, you know, Michel Legrand did the score for Never Say Never Again, no Bond producer would be foolish enough to make such a, you know, a horrible mistake again. And I think that in their attempt to reinvent Bond for a new generation, yeah, they figured, oh, you know, Leon, the professional, you know, this is hip. And you know, look, everyone involved with that picture has pretty much said had they had more time when the score was delivered, they would have brought a new composer. And they rescored the tank chase with John Altman, his orchestrator, and that's a wonderful sequence because it actually uses the Bond theme.
Yeah.
But they would have rescored the movie.
It's such a great sequence with you see Pierce Brosnan sticking up out of that tank,
His
like
joy.
screeching around corners and running over cars. I mean,
You
it's
see
awesome.
Pierce in that, not Bond. You see Pierce, how
Yeah.
happy he is to be playing
Yeah.
James Bond, and it's a beautiful thing because you feel that joy,
Yeah.
and you're happy for him, and the whole sequence is wonderful, and there's just so much. Isabella Scorupco, there's always a lip service paid to. Oh, this is going to be an empowered female Bond girl. She's not the usual Bond girl. Well, you know, she's not the usual Bond girl. She's
Yeah.
good.
She's great, and oh gosh, what's her name?
Famke Janssen.
Famke Janssen is fantastic as the
Yeah,
villainess.
I mean, she is Fatima Blush from Never Say Never Again, but you know,
She plays that role with such
she's great.
relish.
Yeah,
She's so
yeah,
much
yeah.
fun in that part. That sort of seduction / fight scene that they have is terrific. Very entertaining.
and if you didn't get enough of Joe Don Baker in Living Daylights, he's back as a new character, which is something that the Bond movies did, much to my consternation, where they would bring back actors in different roles. You know, now they never do that because everything's a cinematic universe. You know, but I hated, you know, the recasting of Felix Leiter in every movie. I hated the fact when actors would come back in other, like Charles Gray, who plays Henderson in You Only Live Twice, and now he's Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever. I hate that. So, Goldeneye.
Right.
Goldeneye.
So
Absolutely.
Friday's Goldeneye.
Friday's
We have
Goldeneye.
2 more slots because we expanded to Saturday and Sunday.
Well, you got to round out Saturday with Casino Royale,
Absolutely,
of course,
absolutely.
Which is, I think, I agree with Ashley. It may be the best film of all of the Bond films. It's just really smart, sophisticated. Everything comes together in it.
Well, it shows you they could make them like they used to.
Yes. It has that great the scene on the train
Oh,
with
I
Daniel
love
Craig
that.
and Eva Green is just it is It would be an amazing scene in any film. I mean, to me, like that's the kind of scene that makes you go, okay, that person is actually worthy of winning an Academy Award because it is just that good. Like it just crackles.
Skewered.
Yeah.
And it's an homage to North by Northwest, so it's going back to the roots. You know, it's Cary Grant, Eva Marie Saint, that scene, and so it's going back to the roots of the inspiration for the Bond movies, and I love that, and I love that scene. That's probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And there's just so much and it's weird because that movie shouldn't work because it's almost like 3 different movies. You know, you have that brilliant teaser sequence with the parkour. Then you have the casino stuff, which goes on endlessly, which should be boring as hell. It's a bunch of people in the casino, and they made it from Baccarat into Texas Hold'em for the idiots so they would understand
Well,
what's going
also
on. It
being
still works.
the best Baccarat player in the service is like being the best lottery player in the service.
Yeah. And then you end up in the Venice stuff, which is like another movie. And yet it all holds together. And it's so great. And the third act works with the crumbling building and Venice. All miniatures, too. And it's great miniature work. And you compare that to miniature work in Goldeneye, which is Derek Medding's last film, and it shows. I mean, it's not good. I mean, and the stuff in this is fantastic.
And the best closing line, which is
Yeah, the
just
bitch is
Bond,
dead.
James Bond. No, it's Bond,
Oh,
James
yeah,
Bond.
yeah.
When he kills what's his name? And actually, he doesn't kill him because he
Shoots him
captures
because
him.
he's
We
back
know.
in the
No
next
shit.
movie.
Right. But Bond, James Bond, which is also the first time in the film that we hear the James Bond theme.
Yeah,
which is
and David Arnold we
brilliant.
haven't talked about,
Yeah.
who is really another hero because even in the low points of the Pierce era, like Tomorrow Never Dies, those scores by David Arnold are great, and they're a great homage to John Barry. Now, here's my question for Sunday to end this. Casino Royale is Saturday.
Yeah.
Now, there are a couple ways to go with Sunday. The question is, do we go right into Quantum of Solace? Arguably not a great Bond movie, but it is the epilogue to Casino Royale.
No.
And that movie works best when you watch it right after Casino
You
Royale.
You can't end Bond week with a whimper.
No,
Okay?
I think you have to end it with the biggest one, which is Goldfinger.
What an interesting point. I was going to say never again, but I think you're right.
Yep, I agree.
I think it is the most when you
the most
hear
Bond
James Bond,
of the Bond.
you think of Goldfinger. I mean, I think a lot of people do,
Yeah.
and I think you can't have a Bond week without it.
Well, like we said earlier, that's the film that really crystallized what became the Bond formula. Popular had an amazing theme song that's super memorable. You have a villain who is iconic,
Bigger than life.
and has one of them probably the second most quoted line in any James Bond film after Bond, James Bond.
Of course,
you know,
Yeah,
no,
to expect
Mr.
me
Bond,
to
I expect you to die.
Yeah.
It's got a great.
Although, you know what my other
Scheme.
favorite is? I own the club.
Ooh, gee.
When he says, I'm going to talk to the club manager.
Right.
You know, did he have anything to say after Odd Job skewers the statue? He says, "I own the club, Mr. Bond." But and then of course it has the worst line in any of the Bond movies too. It's like listening to the Beatles without wearing earmuffs.
Oh, that's funny.
Which is it may be the worst line in the history of the Bond movies, even ahead of some of those clunkers and
Well,
It's Not Enough with Denise Richards.
My worst one is, and if that's his original ball, I'm Arnold Palmer.
Yeah, I mean, what's more exciting than watching James Bond play golf?
And yet it's great,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's a scene that shouldn't work, right?
Yeah.
It's fucking great. And when they switch the balls, and Odd Job, aha!
But you gotta love a movie where it does that great switch up in the third act, where like Auric Goldfinger is obsessed with gold. I love gold. And
like a leprechaun.
You think that he's going to rob
Steal it,
all
yeah.
of the gold out of Fort Knox
which
of course.
Which is what happens in the book.
Yeah, but they switch it up. It's like, no, he's going to irradiate it, rendering
It's
it
so great.
poisonous and useless.
Even the attention to detail when they went back and shot that insert shot where he stops the bomb and it's 007 because it doesn't even match the master because they came up with it later and then they shot the insert. It's just so clever. And the John Barry score, fucking amazing. And it's so great. And it's funny because I was like thinking Sunday, do we do Never Say Never Again? Do we do Casino Royale 67? Do we do Austin Powers? And it's like, of course it's got to be Goldfinger.
Gotta be.
I mean, my other choice, I agree it's got to be Goldfinger, but I'm also a big fan of You Only Live Twice, which is a film that also solidifies the Bond, exemplifies the Bond formula in that it's taking its first steps, wading into the pool of absurdity. It's starting to get silly at that point, but it's still got some really great stuff.
I love it too. And
I love the theme
agree.
song. I love that beautiful volcano lair set. I mean, it's
another Bond
fantastic.
movie I love that a lot of other people don't love, but I like you, I don't feel it's right for this week. Is Thunderball. A lot of people don't like it because the third act underwater is so slow and lethargic, but it has some of my favorite scenes in any Bond movie, and it really, even more than Goldfinger, sort of defined the template for a Bond movie. But like You Only Live Twice, it has all these great iconic moments, but it doesn't feel. I think what Darren said with Goldfinger is the right way to end the week.
Yeah, and Goldfinger also feels like a complete film.
Yeah.
And it's just. You're right. When we think about James Bond, all of those like sort of the classic elements from the template that is James Bond, they all came what we from compare
that.
It to.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, I think I can't imagine a better way to end 7 Days of 007 on the 4:30 movie. We cheated a little this week, but that's okay because
these
we
are
make
our
it all
rules,
up.
we make it up.
And remember, please, no wagering.
It's your, and you can recreate this at home, and I hope you will. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode of the 4:30 movie. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can reach Steve Melching how?
On Twitter at Stephen Melching.
Darren?
Darren Doctorman. On Twitter at Darren Doc with 1 R.
Ashley Miller on Twitter at AshMaster0.
And I'm Mark A. Altman on Twitter and Instagram. And my new book, So Say We All, An Oral History of Battlestar Galactica, is available wherever books are sold. I'll also be at New York Comic Con on October 4th and 5th, where I'll be hosting panels at New York Comic Con Presents on Battlestar Galactica and a masterclass with genius writer, producer, showrunner, creator Ronald D. Moore. Tickets are available now. And on behalf of Steve, Darren, Ashley, James Bond, Pussy Galore, and myself, thanks for joining us for the 4:30 movie. We'll see you next week for an all-new theme week here on the 4:30 movie.